Mama, truly it was a great victory, and I pray to God to make us thankful to Him for His great love and mercy towards us in delivering us from the horde of our enemies. Measuring our friend's loss in that victory, poor Mr. Willie Lee was wounded desperately when we heard it was thought he must die. God have mercy on his poor young wife.
Reverend Andrews, the Episcopal clergyman and rector of Trinity Church in Shepherdstown, also went to visit William in the Pringle house. In a letter written to his wife, he wrote, "I went to see Willie Lee, who was shot in the breast, mortally as is supposed. Lily had gotten there. He was well attended to by Edwin Lee and others. He could not speak above a whisper and breathed with difficulty, but understood all I said. He was alive, however, yesterday morning when I left, and there is no thought or possibility of his recovery. Mr. Edmund Jennings Lee has gone back again this morning to bring up his body if he dies." Tippy Boatler wrote to Lizzie, her sister Elizabeth Shepard, July 23, 1861, after the Confederate victory at Manassas Bull Run, July 21st.
Lizzie, such excitement as we all have been in for the past 2 days you never knew. Extras have been flying, and the little newsboys screamed like fiends as they yelled and rejoiced over another battle.
William Morgan writes, "My dear Anna," his wife at Falling Springs, about the events. Camp Fairfax Station, July 24th, 1861, my dearest wife. I wrote you a few hurried lines a day or two after the Manassas fight merely to let you know that we were not killed. I do not know whether you have received them or not, and as I expect Mr. Sensendiver to return to Shepherdstown, I will write more fully. We left the neighborhood of Winchester very suddenly and marched day and night for the junction, which we reached on Saturday. We camped that night on what was the battlefield the next day. Sunday, bright and early by dawn, the conflict began with the booming of artillery and the sharp reports of musketry, mingled with hoarse commands given by the officers, the screams of the dying horses and the groans of the wounded, which was kept up without intermission until moonlight. Our cavalry was drawn up in rear of the lines of infantry and kept there until about 12 or 1 o'clock, when the order came for us to do our part. That is, to charge the enemy, which of course we did. We charged up to their right flank, upon which the New York Zouaves Regiment, formerly commanded by Colonel Ellsworth, were stationed. Owing to the dust and smoke, the enemy did not see us until we were among them with our pistols and sabers. We charged them through and returned, cutting and riding them down in every direction. The charge was made just in the nick of time, for believe me, we were whipped beyond doubt. But our cavalry charge decided the fate of the day. When, after 3 hours of desperate fighting on both sides, the enemy being flanked by our cavalry and annoyed by the Newtown battery, for an hour before they were routed, I had a position which we had taken from them on their flight for a mile or two on both sides. Our cavalry, having taken the hills, were stationary for an hour. It was truly a grand and terrible sight to look upon. One incessant roar of artillery and musketry all the time. Every moment men and horses fell, numbers of them, until they could not stop us, or at least thought so when they fled in confusion, and we after them for 8 miles, following them to Centerville. I shan't attempt a description of this glorious battle. You have often read of them and can form some idea when you get the particulars of this eminent fight. Our cavalry, that is, 1 or 2 companies, suffered a good deal. 2 whole front ranks went down as they entered the enemy's lines. Myself and company were in the very center of their ranks. Balls flying thick all around, apparently as thick as hail, and yet, strange to say, there was no one killed. 2 or 3 of us were slightly wounded, myself among the number. 3 or 4 horses were shot and bayoneted by the Zouaves. My wound was caused by the jam of horses and men and ceased to give me any trouble. It was in the knee of my right leg. In an hour I had forgotten it. In my first letter I did not mention it for the reason it was not worth notice. So you see, do not be at all uneasy, for I assume I am in perfect health now. And my horse George behaved nobly, never flinching at any time. I rode over the field of battle the next morning to see the sad havoc by section. Being arrayed against section, men and horses covered the ground in every direction, the most awful and ghastly sights. Some men with heads off from the shoulders, and some with heads, half heads, torn to pieces, some disemboweled and mangled in every conceivable manner. To you or your mother, I suppose it would be an awful spectacle. But to tell you the truth, I, although having as much sympathy as the most of you, seeing so much blood and carnage, soon became used to it, and my curiosity was only to know what sort of wound the poor wretch had received to kill him. There are dead men everywhere, all around. Some crawled into the bushes and died, and some went a mile or 2 and died. Everywhere are the dead. And the whole country smells so very offensively that no one can stay in it or near that region. I am stationed at Fairfax Station, 18 miles from the field and 15 miles from Alexandria. I suppose we will move to Alexandria in a day or 2. I am now on detached service under General Elzey of the Maryland line. Colonel Stewart has been promoted and is now acting as Brigadier General, his promotion owing to the hard fighting and the hard service which those in his command have done. Our regiment has been highly praised, much more than any other in the service. The reason Jack and Davy were not in the fight was that Jack is assistant quartermaster and was with his baggage 4 miles off. Davy just reached camp without arms and had to go to the baggage train for them and did not get up with us again for a day or 2. Archie? Archie was in, but not with any company. He was detailed as an escort to General B of the South Carolina Brigade, and after B was killed, he joined the Amelia County, Virginia troops for the rest of the day. Nellie Height was sick and went home. Fontaine Height was with me all through. I heard that William Lee was killed, and so stated in my letter to you, but I found him in one of the hospitals yesterday. He is very severely wounded, and I think mortally. Poor fellow. I hope he may recover. He was shot through the breast. The morning I saw him, he was better, but I thought it was the state that precedes death. Our loss in officers has been severe. You have no idea of the plunder that was taken. 500 wagons would not hold it. Arms, 40-odd pieces of artillery, numbers of elegant horses, any quantity of provisions and clothing, fancy articles. Our boys were literally loaded down, and I had to scold them for having so much about them. They all turned out in new clothes of the finest kind. Most of them had more clothes than they had ever had. When I started from Winchester, I had but one shirt, and that on my back. After wearing it a week and a half, it was, of course, ready for a change, and seeing quantities of nice new shirts lying around, I just appropriated one for myself. We have quantities of overcoats in addition to all our other traps. I often think of you and my darlings at home. Often. You were in my thoughts on that dreadful Sunday. After the fight had begun and God alone knew whether I may ever see you all again, kiss my dear children for me and tell them not to forget me. Give my love to Mother, Lily, and Cousin Rose and the family. How are you getting on so close with the boss? Deep out of her reach. I saw Jim Towner yesterday, and he said he was glad you had his rooms and hoped you would make yourself comfortable. Camp duties now claim my attention, and I must stop. God bless you and protect you all. Goodbye. Ever yours. W.A. Morgan. Virginia Rust Bettinger wrote from Lexington, July 27, 1861, to her stepmother, Carrie, in Flushing, New York.
Dear Ma, it has been so very long since I have either heard from or written to you that I scarcely know how to commence. I now write at a venture with very little hope of your ever seeing this letter. However, I will do my best, and if you do not receive this, it will not be my fault. I should have written to you long before this, but as I could receive no letters from you, I very naturally concluded that you could receive none from me, and therefore it would be worse than useless to write. The battle was truly a terrible one. It lasted from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening. George was in the thickest of the fight, but thank God he did not receive a scratch. He's a member of Colonel Pendleton's artillery. My anxiousness about George was great indeed. I could learn nothing of or from him until Thursday morning, except that the regiment to which I supposed he belonged had been cut to pieces. You may imagine my suspense and anxiety. On Thursday, I received a hurried line from him assuring me of his perfect safety. My heart overflowed with love and thanksgiving to my Heavenly Father for having spared my brother. It was indeed a great victory, but there were many broken hearts in our country. Measuring our friend's loss in that victory, poor Mr. Willie Lee was wounded desperately, and when we heard it was thought he must die, God have mercy on his poor young wife. Tucker and Holmes Conrad of Martinsburg were shot dead side by side, the only sons of their father. Mr. Peyton Harrison of Martinsburg, Mr. Conrad's nephew, was killed. When we think of all the sad and stricken hearts throughout the land, I am afraid there is danger of our forgetting God's kindness towards us in causing us to triumph over our bloodthirsty enemies. But I pray that He will give us humbly thankful hearts. I should think if the people of the North will possibly realize, as the North in this battle, it would prove to them the utter folly of attempting to conquer the South. Why have men fought desperately against fearful odds? I do wish you would come home. I expect you can do so with perfect safety. Thence to you, mother and sisters. Cousin Lee sends love. I wish you could come home.